Hello, everyone. Brad Logan here, Talk of Champions. Apologize for the audio issues, but we do have Jake Thompson and Michael Katz with us here on the Talk of Champions. Not in the normal studio today. We're on location, but Jake, of course, works for the Ole Miss Spirit. He's an affiliate of the On3 system. And, of course, Michael Katz with the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Gentlemen, appreciate you jumping on today. A lot to get to, baseball and football, a lot of stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, it's crossover season right now. We're almost over, but powering through.
Jake, what are you kind of looking for tonight? Let's start with baseball just for a moment. What are you thinking with Ole Miss and Tennessee?
Yeah, I think you need Hunter to have a better first inning than he has had at times. I know he's worked his magic and got out of those messy starts, but I think he can only play with fire so many times with these SEC stats. So get off that first inning and keep the tone, and I'd have to fire back up after a rough first inning and then strike out 8 on the road, from there. So for me, it's that I think the bats have maybe found something. I know they look good, obviously, Southern Miss, and carried it over from past weekend with LSU. So I think they can keep going. But yeah, for me, it all starts on the mound. I think you got to get that win tonight and take the little bit of pressure off Cade. And if you can get the first two, then Taylor can pitch like he did, I think, with pressure off this past Sunday.
Michael, obviously, we were all there. We saw the LSU series. The sweep, did it surprise you that Ole Miss swept LSU?
A little bit, and I think that's mainly because I don't think I quite understood what LSU is this year. And I think LSU people don't necessarily know what LSU is this year. This is clearly not the team from last year that won the national title. This is a very different looking team that's going through its ups and downs. So I guess I didn't know where they were at before the series. But I think bigger than that, I don't know if I had seen Ole Miss's bats produce with runners in scoring position like they did in that series, and they have recently. I know Jake brought up the pitching, obviously, and that's you win the SEC with your Friday and Saturday night guys, but for so much of the season, it's been home run or bust, and it's strikeouts and not being able to produce with guys on base. I think in that last game against they had 14 guys, I believe, on base in that game, and that was just sort of emblematic of what they were going through. Recently, they've been producing without home runs. I mean, the home runs are great, but they're driving guys in from second. They're moving runners up, all those sorts of things. So I guess getting back to the sweep LSU question, I think that version of Ole Miss is one that I hadn't really seen a ton of this year. So I guess it was a little bit surprising in that regard. Maybe this is what Ole Miss actually is. It's going to be really interesting to see, though, because, the series aren't going to get any easier. Obviously, Tennessee is playing in Knoxville is going to be tough. If the offense does what it's been doing, though, and Hunter and Cade do what they've been doing, this team looks really hard to stop.
When you look at the Tennessee team, obviously fresh off a sweep of Mississippi State, Jake, did that surprise you? The Volunteers kind of been up and down since Tony Vitello headed off to San Francisco. Now, after sweeping Mississippi State, what are your thoughts on Tennessee and Ole Miss's chances this weekend?
Yeah, I think everybody, Ole Miss fans are going. Of course, Tennessee looks good after they lose to LSU. The week before Ole Miss comes to town, they sweep Mississippi State and look like the team that Tony Vitello been leading for the past few years and won a national title not long ago. So I think that's what it comes down to. Kind of similar to how Michael was like with this LSU team a week ago. What Tennessee team are you going to see, and what is the real Tennessee team? And I think that's a big case now. At home, they've swept Mizzou and then lost 2 to LSU, and those are the only home series they had in the first 5 series or weekends. So they had home much and against a decent team, obviously better than Missouri, they struggle. I think if you're Miss, you at least have that sample size to lean on. But I'm sure Tennessee has thought there might be a drop off when Tony left and what left with them and just players that left from last year's team. But I think they expected it to be such a kind of middling Tennessee team. They're just not used to those expectations now. So yeah, tonight you get Dr. Jekyll and you get Mr. Hyde for Tennessee.
Michael, we talked with Mike at the end of the LSU series, and I mean, obviously, I think it was probably pretty special just because he played there. And, anytime you can beat LSU, if you're an Ole Miss fan, I don't care what the sport is, it's obviously well thought of. He talked a lot about leadership, and we haven't talked about the Southern Miss game, but that to me, yet again, Will Furness in making big plays, making big hits, and I thought we asked Mike Clement the other day, or at least Ben did, about launch angle and home runs versus base hits, and he really didn't get into it, but it really feels like there's a leadership quality to this team with Udemart, with Will Furness, with Hunter Elliott, and what I mean by that is just going with the pitch, like we've seen Will Furness do, not trying to pull everything. It just seems like the little things with this team just kind of adding up over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I remember after that state sweep, we asked Mike, do you think this team has the leaders it needs to be able to rebound from this? And, Mike isn't like he doesn't like looking at those sorts of things mid-season. He definitely likes looking at that after the season. But he did say, guys like Furness and whatnot, those are guys who you feel pretty good about being able to get you out of this. And I mean, what a turnaround it's been. Again, then looking back after the LSU series, I asked, what have you, how big have these 2 weeks been for you guys? Because obviously, 2 SEC series wins. I think it was 7 out of 8 overall, all that sort of stuff. Mike went back to, it's not so much like the wins and making progress in the SEC standings. It's more of the resilience they showed. They got hit in the gut. It's either going to go one of two ways. Are you going to bounce back, or are you going to lay down? And this team didn't lay down. And I think that goes back to leaders like Will and Hunter Elliott and Judd and guys who have really sort of seen everything at this program. This isn't a team that's going to be phased by a lot. And I think when you have an older team, I think that's one of the benefits. And Mike Bianco has said it, old teams win in college baseball. And I think that in this era, sometimes you get these really young, talented teams, but, what do they do when they get swept? Do they know how to handle that sort of thing? This is a team like Will Furness has dealt with being swept in his career. They were pretty bad his first couple of years. And same with Judd. And, Hunter's dealt with adversity, personally. So this is a team that understands how to ride the highs and lows, and it's game to game, it's pitch to pitch, it's inning to inning, it's all those sorts of things. It's a pretty impressive group of leaders for sure.
Jake, you followed the conference very closely, and just kind of a question to both of you. It's almost like, okay, Georgia's ready to roll. Georgia's the best team. They sweep Mississippi State, and then all of a sudden they lose 2 out of 3 to Florida. Ole Miss is struggling. They win 2 out of 3 against Florida. Then they sweep LSU. All of a sudden Mississippi State's at the top of their game. They get swept by Tennessee and Georgia. Where is the SEC in your opinion, Jake? And who's kind of at the top? And what are your thoughts right now as we are at the midway point of the season, close to midway point of the season?
Yeah, and to add to that, Georgia lost at Arkansas last night to start their series, and so now if Ole Miss wins tonight, they're 9-7. Who 9-7 team, just 2 games back to the top. I mean, that's how fast this turned in 2.5, 3 weekends. And obviously, Ole Miss has to take care of its own house in these next 15 games. But I think there's going to be a ton of just logjam. The SEC may have to create new tiebreakers. I've been talking to people just telling when kind of talking about the season. And I think from the 3 to 4 spot in the standings to 11 to 13, I think it's just going to be a mess after these 5 weeks. And seeding is going to come down to, I think that last weekend before Hoover of when teams may play and start that tournament. And, and then beyond that, seeding wise for the NCAA tournament, that will start the next week after that. And Ole Miss has turned it around. They're 8-1 since that state series. State's lost 6 straight SEC games with, I think a couple of midweek wins mixed in there. And I don't think State's a bad team. I just think that it's going to be a everybody beats everybody every weekend kind of thing. And 15-15 is not going to be something to feel bad about, or 16-14. I think that's going to get you a long way in this conference. And, there may be a couple that pull ahead here at the end and be 1 and 2 and in that mix. But, yeah, if you can flirt with a 500 record or a couple above it, you're going to be sitting pretty if you miss. So I think you got to try to go at least 8-7 again at worst, and you're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I'll come to you. Is 16 the magic number for you for Ole Miss to solidify themselves in the NCAA tournament and possibly hosting? Where are they at 15 wins and then obviously 17? What's it take for a national seed, a top 8 seed, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, a top 8 probably feels like 17.
Yeah.
I think they were at 16 last year. I mean, 500, 14, and 16, I think is going to probably get you in. I know this is a weird SEC, right? Like, there's a lot of good teams, but there's not that one where you say, man, that's the team to look out for. LSU is down. Vanderbilt is down. Some weeks Texas looks incredible, and then some weeks they don't look very good. Same with Auburn, Oklahoma, and Georgia. There's just there's a lot of very good teams that, like Jake said, are going to beat up on each other. So I think that 500 mark is probably going to get you on the cusp of a top 16 seed, especially with Ole Miss's schedule. I mean, if you go 15-15 with that, you're feeling pretty good. 16-14 for sure. I think 17 is probably the magic for a top 8. But I think that this is again it's a different SEC. Even Arkansas is not the typical Arkansas that we're used to seeing. There's just a lot of parity in the conference right now. And there's always a lot of really good teams, but it's not usually where there isn't that super heavy hitter where you just know that's an Omaha team. I don't know if I feel that way about any particular team, because on a week-to-week basis, it's so all over the place. So a long way of saying I think that 500, 14 and 16, I think you are for sure in. The 13-17 conversation comes up every year, and that's, I don't think you want to play roulette like that. But I think 500 for sure. 16-14, I think you're pretty comfortable hosting. And then 17 and 13, I think you feel really, really, really good about that top 8 seed.
Jake, has this pitching staff surprised you? Obviously, we knew Hunter Elliott would be good. You wrote a great story, by the way, on the Ole Miss Spirit. That's an affiliate of On3. You can join over on top of Michael's head there at that QR code and come on board and read everything you need to know about the Ole Miss Spirit and Ole Miss athletics. But anyway, it was a good story I thought you wrote about Walker Hooks and looking at the rest of Taylor Rabe. And this staff has been really, really good. Who has surprised you on this staff? And what are your thoughts with Hunter Elliott early? And then, of course, Hooks and the remainder of this pitching staff and Kay Townsend.
Yeah, no, I think once Hunter was coming back, or we knew he was coming back in the summer, we pulled his name out of the draft, or however it went in July, I think everybody felt good. And then we, knew what Kate kind of at the end of the season, that coming out party against LSU in the tournament, SEC tournament, and how he did in the regional. So you felt like you had Friday, Saturday, and I've always been in the thought of, if you've got 66% of the weekend figured out pitching wise, you can kind of figure out that Sunday slot and not play too much fire, especially if you're just a good team that can win enough. And then, so of course, Will Libbert, Missouri transfer, got that Sunday start for a little bit, but then SEC play came and he just didn't take a step I think people were hoping he'd take, despite the numbers he did have in Missouri were not jumping off the page at you last year. But Joel had done such a good job last year and over the offseason of the pitchers that have been here and improved them and worked on their pitching, choices, selections, and adding pitches that she thought he could do something. It just didn't translate. And about a month ago, I think when Ole Miss was at Pittsburgh playing Southern to start that first SEC weekend, Mike said, we're kind of playing with everything, and one of those things was maybe Taylor being a closer, because just didn't have a closer option. But then we see Taylor became the Sunday guy, and he's excelled. He played really well, and he has 2 chances there in that spot. And so I think that's maybe solidified at least right now. And then you see what Walker Hooks has done these past 4 outings. I mean, twice against Florida, twice against LSU, and he's put up major numbers. Pitchers who are eligible for the stats in SEC play. He's got one of the top 5 ERAs just overall in SEC play. And that's obviously that's what you want, and that's what they were hoping he could do. Mike kind of talked to us this past weekend during the LSU series about Hooks and said Joel was high on him being a back-end guy before Mike was. And Mike kind of had acquiesced to that idea once there wasn't closer that that took the spot. And yeah, I kind of wrote it, and a little biased with the former, Rendon alums kind of stick up for each other there. But it's good to see him playing well because I've had former coach text him every week. For a while, I didn't have great news about his outings, but these past 2 weekends they've been positive updates, and so it's good to see not just from that perspective, but just from Ole Miss's perspective of they've got arms and they're a really good staff. If they could just quit playing musical chairs with their roles outside of the starters, I think this is something that can carry them, especially as we already talked about if the bats can get hot.
We'll go to Michael. Before we do, Michael, I want to say if you're into long form reading, encourage you to go to Daily Journal. That's djournal.com and read all about Michael's great articles that he writes in regards to every sport at Ole Miss. You can follow him on X at Michael L. Katz. He's, of course, Jake Thompson on 3 on X. And, Michael, we'll come to you. One thing I really like what you do on X is you kind of have a long form answer. Or if there's a good answer by Coach Pete Golding or others, players, everything, you kind of dictate that, and we really enjoy that. I'll come to you and ask you kind of a broad picture question. If you look at Mike Bianco, and you've covered this program for a number of years, and maybe it's Jake Mangrum coming in, but what have you seen out of Mike in regards to adapting? What have you seen out of Mike in regards to lineup construction and specifically possibly the pitching lineup, calling pitches? What have you seen from Mike over the last couple of years in regards to adapting?
I think the biggest thing was handing over the reins of pitching. And I know that's a really easy thing to go to. And that's something that, even when Ole Miss was really, really good, I know fans were asking for at times. That's just a lot to put on a manager or a head coach, right? And I think that, Mike is a guy who has built this program up and he wants to manage every part of it. And, it just wasn't working for a couple of years. And he understood that in order for, to get this thing back on track, he needed a pitching coach. And he found a great one in Joel. Joel's done an incredible job over the last couple of years, really solidifying what they do and, helping the pitchers with their psyches and all those sorts of things. And not just the mechanical stuff and the on field. You talk to any of the pitchers and they talk about what a huge impact Joel has had, not just on how to throw a slider or adding a cutter or whatever it is. It's all the little things too, mentally and emotionally and stuff like that. So, and I think that too took something off Mike too. Mike's got a whole program to run. I think that's a lot to put on one guy. And of course, there's navigating the transfer portal and they had some classes where they whiffed. A couple years ago, they had a couple guys who it just didn't work. And you're always going to have that happen. But when you're depending on those guys, it's really, really tough to miss on 2. When you're only taking in, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. So, it seems like the last couple of years they've hit in the portal. I think, Becerra is one of the great hits this year. I know he's been a little bit up and down lately, but this was a guy who I think had like 13 career home runs at Clemson, something like that. And obviously he went through some injuries and whatnot. I think he's got 15 right now. So, he's been a huge part of what they've done. They've hit on that, they hit on the outfield last year. But I think the big thing too is with the pitchers, they've hit on homegrown guys recently, guys like Hunter, guys like Walker Hooks, guys like Cade Townsend. I know he's from California. He's from my neck of the woods. I remember hearing about him when he was coming up. And I talked to a high school coach who coached against him. I was like, give me a scouting report. And he said, amazing stuff, but wild. And that was all we saw last year. And now we see a guy who has pinpoint control. And I think that's a credit to Joel and the same thing with Rabe. Rabe was, obviously dealt with injuries to start his career. But he looks like a seasoned guy now. And so I think that Mike being able to delegate and realizing that right now you can't do everything. Like you're a head coach, you're a general manager, like you are so many things right now. You need to be able to delegate. And I think that's a credit to him for being able to do that. And it's worked really well.
Jake, there have been a lot of pleasant surprises on the team this year, whether it be Cannon Golden, whether it be Owen Pano, whether it be at the plate. Braden Randall has had some big hits. Who are some players that maybe we haven't mentioned a lot of that have
kind of turned your eye just a little bit and have been huge components, specifically in this, I believe, 8-1 run they're on?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is Aiden Federico's figured out something had kind of started at the Florida series. Just his bat finally got working there in the 9 hole, and then they've moved him up a little bit after that, and that was something to see. And then, of course, we've all been on the Owen Pano saga for a year and a half now. Finally, putting him in the H spot, but with Colin Reuter just kind of a swamp scuffling. Mix it up, put him there, and not having to worry about fielding anything. Just work on your bat, get that figured out. And they've used him at shortstop in the midweeks, but getting Pano's bat going and his confidence going, and I think that's huge. These guys that they need to do well haven't until like we said, this past 9-game stretch, and also I think it's hard to not notice the young guys that Mike's been trying in the outfield, Cannon Gold and some other guys. Topher Jones, a transfer, he's mixed matched them. Obviously, left field's kind of been a revolving door depending on matchups. Nobody's really grabbed it, but those guys, Golden has been a steady bat in the lineup the past couple games or weeks, and that's a true freshman. That's a guy I talked to in the summer who was excited to be coming Ole Miss, didn't get drafted, or I don't even think selected at all, maybe, and so he's here, and that bat's paying off, and that's another one to throw in a lot of what Michael was saying of homegrown guys that they've hit on, and Cannon's doing it immediately, kind of what you thought Payne would do, but it took Payne a year and a half, obviously, to get going. So those are a lot of the guys, and obviously the ones you expect. You can handle a couple cold bats like Austin Foley's, just really hit or miss this year, more so than it was last year. You can handle that with how good he is behind the plate defense. It was when they had 7 or 8 bats that were freezing cold during that stretch that's where everything just goes bad, no matter who you put in. So whatever it is, they found something. Maybe it was that 9th inning in Gainesville on Saturday where they scored 5 after when Udemark home run sparked them, and it just kind of cleared their heads and got confident at the plate, or something else. But it's working right now, and it's hard to not say that that's just how baseball is. A lot of people don't like that little catchphrase, but it's a 56-game season. 9 guys you depend on, 56 games. They're not all going to be chugging along at the same time the way you want them to. And it may be a long season, but these past 2 weekends have shown maybe they've got something there, a team that can make a run here.
5:30 first pitch in Mississippi, 6:30 Eastern in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's Ole Miss in Tennessee in a big 3-game set. I want to say a special thank you to all of our sponsors. Our title and presenting sponsor is Allen Samuels, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram. Thankful for all they do. Riverland Roofing, appreciative of those guys at Riverland Roofing. Thank you to everybody at Drew Moak and USA Benefits Group. And then, of course, C-Spire. C-Spire, a big component here for us on the Talk of Champions. You're looking for that game day haircut, go by and see them today at 1735A on University Avenue in Oxford. And then the Hearn Law Firm, 662-766-7777. So, Michael, we got 7.5 minutes, I believe, Tuesday of watching the Rebels practice. I guess everybody else is seeing about as much as we have. But your early thoughts on spring practice and, anything that might be jumping out at you, as we've seen very little of Ole Miss this year.
Yeah, the ultimate irony is that the other guy in Baton Rouge opened up practice completely. I think there's a little bit of gamesmanship there. I urge all of my LSU covering friends to realize that's not how it's going to be for the long term. You will get your 7.5 to 8 minutes as well. That being said, it's hard to tell from when there's a lot of guys in yellow and green jerseys. There's a lot of guys who went through off-season procedures, had stuff cleaned up. And we're watching a lot of special teams when we're out there. I think the bigger thing for me, and the reason that I think spring ball is interesting because sometimes you put a lot of you think a guy who's going to break out, he has a huge spring game or whatever. This was back during the spring game era. And then he never does anything during the regular season. I think you take it all sort of with a grain of salt, but I think that the interviews with players have been pretty enlightening. And I think especially now when this is an era where guys are year to year in terms of, are they going to stay or are they going to go? And, getting to ask every player, like, why did you stay? I think is pretty enlightening, and I think that's some of the best stuff that we get. Obviously talking to Trinidad after his off season, was good, and getting all that settled down. It was good to hear from him finally. But talking to guys like Deuce Alexander and Eccles and Cam Franklin and all these guys, these are these are guys who, if they had entered the portal, would have gotten a lot of money, and I'm sure that they are very well compensated at Ole Miss. There's no question. But this is the free agency era, and so I think that being able to talk to them about why they stayed, the vision they have for the program, Pete's vision for the program, I think hearing it from all those guys has that for me that's been the highlight.
Caleb Odom is a name too, Michael, that everybody's really anticipating. The stand-up tight end has done a really good job. He was made available to the media, and you guys had a chance to visit with him. Here's Caleb Odom and what he had to say at the media availability this week.
He looks at us like guys that are going to make plays whenever we need to and whenever we're put in the position to. And so I think it's definitely an advantage, from any other school. I think JDB has a great idea of what he wants to accomplish with tight ends. And so I think, all of us are ready for that, and we're ready to make plays.
Has this spring been better for you in terms of just having your role defined now? And I know you were kind of splitting time in rooms throughout last year before they kind of moved you to tight end.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more defined now, strictly tight end and, moving around and stuff. But I put on a lot of weight, and I've been trying to, really embody that role. And so I think it's definitely defined, and now I'm just getting my technique and stuff down and really trying to just hone in on all my, the aspects of the tight end game.
How would you assess your first year here? What went well for you? What were some things you could have worked on?
Yeah, I would assess my first year here. It's pretty average. I think I could have did a lot of things better. I think with the position switch, it was kind of a lot for me at first, and I was able to kind of just focus and get into the tight end role. But I think for the most part, a lot of things went good. I think a lot of things went also not great. I think a lot of the drops I had were definitely an issue, and I'm looking to fix those this year and really try and just be more of the player I know I can be, because I definitely know I can make a bigger impact than I did last year. So that's the goal.
Maybe you answered this, but how does last year help you become a better player this year?
Yeah, I mean, just ultimately being in the positions I was last year, it's good film to watch. Some of the games that I was in and the plays that I was making into this year, it's the same offense pretty much, just, different terminology. And so I think that's very helpful.
To kind of expand on that a little bit and just the improvement aspect, how have you seen yourself become maybe even a better run blocker as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just think technique, but Coach Woodle, our tight end coach, tells us that, playing fast overcomes any technical issue. So you really just got to play fast and just want to go in there and strike guys. So that's the ultimate thing. It's just a mindset.
Were there any
role defined now? And I know you were kind of splitting time in room.
Jake, you asked a couple of questions. One question anyway. What are your thoughts on Caleb Odom? What do you think he's going to be utilized like as a tight end, and maybe maybe not his hand in the dirt, maybe more of a sit-down guy like a Caden Lee was?
Yeah, with John David Baker's offense, it's a more tight end friendly, kind of that 12 personnel as they call it. And so I expect him and Lacoste probably to be out there a good bit. But the question is, can he take a step forward? He called his season last year average, which, it's kind of hard to argue. And I don't mean in a negative way. It's just he had like maybe a handful of catches, 19 or so, and for not a lot of yards and a pair of touchdowns. But he showed what he can do. He caught that 2-point conversion in the Fiesta Bowl against Miami, which I think was kind of the last catch he made of the year. And so, you end on a high note. And, I think and Michael was the smart one to follow up a few questions later to ask how much weight he put on. It was around 12 pounds, he said, floating around 240, which, it's a big jump. That's probably one of the bigger jumps if you scan the roster and guys what they were back in December to now. And so, obviously he wants to embrace that pass block, run block role as well as get a little bigger, having a frame more suitable for tight end and kind of a slimmer tight end that's more of a receiver. And So I am excited to see what he can do. Obviously, Baker's high on him. Pete's high on the fact he's kind of a utility Swiss Army guy. So I do think even though he's solely in the tight end room now this spring and it's his role, I think you will see him still as kind of a every now and then receiver, just kind of throw off a defense planning. So it'll be exciting to see what he does in that tight end room. That's also got a pre-scoring and Brady who's transferred here and a couple others, and Hayden Bradley who's a rising sophomore that they were high on, and I think he's probably going to get a chance this year at times too.
Michael, we see obviously Kewan Lacey on the screen, but as you saw just a moment ago, the big-time wide receiver who is gone, Stribling, he's going to be missed. Are there other wide receivers in that room? Do you think Deshaun Stribling, they can take up for the slack that he's leaving? Because a lot of those catches we saw in the Sugar Bowl, in the Fiesta Bowl, blocking downfield, he's a huge component of this offense that's gone now.
Yeah, I don't think it can be overstated how good he was down the stretch. I know early, it's the thing with having a deep receiver room is it seems like every game there's a chance for somebody else to go off, and sometimes it was Harrison Wallace, sometimes it was Caden Lee, sometimes it was Deuce. But really towards the end of the season, Stribling was, when they needed plays, he was pretty impressive, and he shot up draft boards from what it looks like. I think he's going to hear his name called in the first couple of days from what it looks like. Running a 4.39 or whatever it was probably helped. But I think when you look at the receiver room, and we kind of had the same conversation last year, like how do you replace Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins and Juice Wells? Well, they did that, and that's through the portal. It's depending on some guys to take steps that you already had. I think that Gill from Syracuse is a big one. I think he has a chance to be a really good playmaker. Jonte Cook was one of the highest recruited receivers in the country. He's obviously had some stuff, personal stuff, and he's been on a couple of teams, but when he's right, he's as talented as they come. Deuce Alexander, they don't just give number ones out at Ole Miss. He had to earn that. And he's a playmaker. He's one of those guys who decided to stay. So I think this receiver room has, kind of like it did last year, a lot of different skill sets. They have some jump guys who can win jump balls. They have some possession guys. They have the speedsters. They have the underneath guys. And they have a lot of guys who can do a lot of different things. It's kind of hard to say who's going to be their Stribling as of right now, especially since we haven't seen a ton of them practicing. And then of course, you can't forget Caleb Cunningham, who there's a reason he was a 5-star. I think people are expecting him to take a step too. So I think they probably have to feel pretty good, within that group of really talented guys, that they are going to find the different sort of the types of receivers that they need to have different roles, the different niche receivers that they've done a really good job of filling the last couple of years.
Jake, we saw just a moment ago, and it may have been you, maybe Michael, I'm not sure who it was, but it said quite possibly the play of the year could have been Bryson Sanders not decleating the Georgia defender that would have brought that play back. Obviously would see it was a huge first down of Kewan Lacey getting the first down. That interior offensive line appears to be set. From an outside standpoint, what are you kind of thinking about in regards to outside right tackle and left tackle for Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, no, go ahead, Jake.
Michael might can add more to this, but I think it's still a work in progress. That's the one area that Pete hadn't really settled on, and I don't think anybody has settled on. Of course, we don't know who's been rotating out there, because we don't get to see practice. But I think Kern and some other guys, some new guys, are going to have to step up. That's once it's going to be an Ole Miss offensive line. That's kind of the question mark, at least at the start of the season, to how this offense is going to go and give Trinidad time in the pocket.
Yeah, Michael, I come to you about the offensive line. They were really good last year, and it really felt like that they got a lot from Jaden Williams down the stretch, along with Diego Pounds. I mean, they weren't world beaters by any stretch, but they're going to be tough to replace.
Yeah, I think they gave up a combined 1 sack last year, those Pounds and Williams. And, Williams had an interesting career where he was a starting left tackle and then he got benched and he had injuries and all these sorts of things. And he really had an impressive last year. So credit to him. And Pounds was rock solid really since he got to Ole Miss. So, but yeah, I mean, I think Karius Kern is one of those high profile pieces that you kind of need to come through. They got Kinsler from Miami, who's played a lot of ball, not necessarily as a starter, but I think he played in every game last year for Miami. Enoch from Florida, who's a really big, talented guy who's maybe not as polished. So yeah, I mean, again, when you have Sanders and Kudus and Townsend, that's a rock solid group. Outside it's gonna be interesting to see. And I remember I asked Pete that a couple of weeks ago, and kind of like Jake said, he basically was like, we don't know. This is gonna last till August probably, to figure out how all the pieces fit. Again, it's hard to expect your two tackles to give up one combined sack in a 15-game season. I mean, that was pretty incredible what they did last year. But I think there's talent there that they can make it through for sure.
Defensively, we had a chance to visit with Antonio Kite not long ago, earlier this week. And Jake, what were your thoughts about Antonio Kite? Your thoughts about this defense heading into the season? It feels like they've really retooled that defensive backfield.
Yeah, I think the secondary is going to be a little bit better even last year because it kind of down to Kite and Braxton being two guys that kind of hold it together there. Obviously a lot was made of Kite leaving Auburn this time last year and the reasons why and whatever those were, and only playing 8 games this final season there. And then they came here and no problems that we heard of as off the field or disciplinary or anything, and became one of the better secondary players at Golding. And I think he was asked yesterday why did he come back, and he said it was for Pete. He liked that relationship with Pete and building on it, and obviously Pete being a head coach, that's going to make it even a more reason to come. So no, I'm excited about the secondary because I don't think they're as much of a weak spot as they had been last year, and it kind of was all year, and we saw it kind of there at the end in the Fiesta Bowl, or where Carson able to make some plays that just because of you guys cast or just lack of talent, what are you going to call it? But I'm excited about that one. Defense, yeah, that was kind of the first. I was set up all Pete made a lot of noise on first in the transfer portal was the defense, which clearly those guys he was familiar with because that's what he was recruiting before obviously everything changed for him and responsibility-wise November 30th. So the linebackers, I think, upgraded from what they had, which kind of been talked about at Museum, a few different arenas at this point. And defensive line, I like, obviously Will Eccles is going to be kind of your anchor, which brought in new edge guys. But I think they have a lot of, upside. So that's the side of the ball that I think is going to play even better than it did last year. And you saw where that took them just a few months ago to being 14 seconds away from Miami and having a shot at a national title. So I get why, on paper, they're viewed high. But obviously we got to see it once they put the ball down in Nashville come Labor Day weekend against Louisville and move forward. But that defense should be enough talent to get them back in the playoffs and make another run.
As Jay pointed out, Antonio Kite really excited about playing for Coach Pete Golding and another year in the system.
We real close, so we was together at Alabama. So I can't betray him and go anywhere else. He gave me a chance to come here, stuck his head out for me, so I owe him that.
How big was last year for you in your development? It felt like you just kind of took your game to a next level in the secondary.
Last year was big for me, my teammates and Coach Brown, Coach Pete, they really pushed me and made me work, and they made me strain and made me be a better me.
You just fit better in this system, or what was it that kind of clicked for you last year?
I can fit good anywhere. I mean, I'm a ball player. At the end of the day, I can do all things.
Yeah, I guess when you mention, being close with Pete, you're not the first player to say that. What are some examples of being close with Pete, and what does he do as a coach that makes that easy to be?
Well, first of all, he texts me outside of football. Like, he called me, we get on the phone. He just be him, childish. We just have fun. He a good dude.
How have you seen yourself kind of excel with the spring camp since you did not have it last year? Like, what's your main goals, I should ask?
Oh yeah, man. I've been doing better. You know, my teammates kind of pushed me a little bit more this year because my last year. So I just want the group to. I want to get the young guys better mostly, like just show them the right way, basically.
Antonio, I wouldn't expect you to.
Michael, taking a look at this defense, and one thing I thought was interesting that Pete Golding said is he pretty much said that at the end of the Miami game, I said the end of the Miami game, that last couple of drives, they were give out. And there was not the depth that needed to be, whether it be on the defensive front or whether it be in the defensive backfield. What do you think about it? Do you think they've retooled this defense enough to at least get some depth for if they get down the ways in the season, they'll be able to have some quality depth?
Yeah, I think that again, like it's funny. I was looking through, like the season previews that get written every year, like the magazines, Athlon and Lindy's and stuff. And I wrote Ole Miss's last year, and I wrote that like the defensive line has a chance to be really, really good. Maybe not quite as good as the Walter Nolan group, but could be solid. So credit to me. I'm a prophet. The defensive line was very, very good. Will Echols was as good of a defensive tackle as there was in the country at the end of last year. I don't think you can argue that. Cam Franklin came on hot. I think the biggest thing, so much of what Pete wants to do, I think he wants to be able to get pressure without having to blitz a ton. It helps open things up for the secondary and whatnot, and the secondary's improved for sure. There's no question. I think for me, I think the depth is they have a lot of really, really good pieces, and they brought more in. Boudreaux from Florida, and the guy from Oregon, and the guy from Alabama. I mean, there's tons of talent brought in on the edge and in the middle. I think the biggest thing is do you have that guy who can get you 10 sacks? I don't know if they do right now. I don't know who it would be. I think there's a chance. I mean, we've seen Taron Perkins do it before, but he's playing a different role than he is now. Last year was Princeville, who was as hot of an edge rusher as there was in the country towards the end. He's obviously no longer at Ole Miss. I think that's going to be the thing. I think they have the depth. Like, they're not going to get fatigued during games. I think the question, though, is, like, do you have that ace pass rusher or pass rushers, that guy who can take over a game, who can sort of seal it for you when you know your team needs to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. Again, like, it was pretty clear that Miami was going to have to throw towards the end of that game, and there was nothing Ole Miss could really do about it. I think that's all about pass rush, and I think that's my biggest question is, do you have that guy who can be a 10-ish sack type?
That's a great question with Prince Will and Miami Ellen headed off the NFL. I do believe that if Renaud can come in, if you can free up Perkins a little bit, that definitely could free up the edge. Before we get out of here today, I want to thank both of you, Jake Thompson and Michael Katz, for joining us here on the Talk of Champions on this Friday edition. Hope all of you have a great weekend. Jake, I'd love to kind of ask you, Ole Miss from a university perspective, if you look at what Keith Carter is doing and what the university is doing as a whole, it's interesting to see where the program is right now as I can figure out what I have done to the there it is. You're looking at the university as a whole. How are your thoughts about in regards to Keith Carter and the athletic program as a whole, and kind of how he's done over his tenure in Oxford?
Yeah, I think, Keith, like every other AD, was kind of thrusted into a new era that there's no book for, NIL and transfer portal, not just football, but for all, and not even the big three, but for every sport that it was able for it. So soccer, all this and that. So, they're asked to kind of steer a ship that nobody's ever even seen built before. And, Keith has done that, I think, as well as anybody could. Obviously, Ole Miss was on the forefront of the NIL with Mississippi kind of being that state right after Florida, kind of allow it past it before it just became a blanket thing everywhere. So, under Kiffin got things going here for that, and it's carried over. And with basketball, obviously, the men's side is kind of up and down, scuffling a little bit right now. All's quiet on the portal front for the men, which got people nervous. But Keith has given the women's program everything and show everything they needed or asked for, and you've seen what she's been able to put together in her years and what they've done and the talent she's able to bring here because of the support they have. And obviously, history with 2 players for the first time getting drafted in the WNBA the other night draft, and obviously soccer and softball are kind of up and down. That is how it is. I think Keith has done a great job, and now he's announced this new, I guess, development entertainment district, whatever it's going to actually be called, kind of a joint project with whoever comes in and kind of helps fund it. They're going to add stuff around Vaughn Way, the stadium, and kind of stream a lot of things. Put all the offices into one building. You're not going to have everybody kind of spread out. He's wanting everybody on the roof, which I think works with so many pieces that are moving, that are important. You kind of want all that in one spot. And, it'd be hard to sit here and say that it was the wrong call to hire him, when they did, because he's done, and Ole Miss is still a national team, a national brand. And, everybody kind of thought that would go away when a certain person did to Baton Rouge. But I think it's even gone better and done better with what Pete Golding has done with the football program, and obviously the noise they made those 3 games in December and January. But yeah, if anybody would sit there and give bad remarks or grade how Keith has done, I think it would be in bad faith, because the athletic department is probably as strong top to bottom as it's been in a very, very long time.
Michael, I'll throw it to you as we finish up here on the Talk of Champions today. Thankful for all of our sponsors and all of you that have joined the show here today live. And, of course, you can get the show on demand. That's Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and always available at YouTube as you're watching here live today. Remember, get all of that information on the Ole Miss Spirit. That's an affiliate of On3. That's omspirit.com. You can read that great story that Jake wrote about Walker Hooks, and you can also read all about Ole Miss football spring practice at the Daily Journal, whether it be the print edition or the online edition. That's Michael Katz. Does a great job covering Ole Miss. Michael, I'll throw it to you. The city of Oxford, and it just feels like that the city of Oxford kind of bustling at the seams. You kind of looked at that September 19th game against LSU, how the city's going to be able to hold all of those fans in. The city's kind of blowing up. The university's kind of wide open. I know you've covered a lot of different programs here in your tenure. How do you think Ole Miss is right now in regards to not necessarily financial, but a national brand, as Jake would say, and thought about throughout the Southeastern Conference?
I think when you look at a program, I think historical context and data is really important. Like, where has a program been and where is it now, and how do those things sort of align? And like, I know basketball had a down year, but they just made their second ever Sweet 16, right? Like, that's a good check mark, right? The softball team made the Women's College World Series for the first time ever on this crazy run. That's another check mark. Baseball, I know it seems like a long time ago, but they won a national title a few years ago. That's a check mark. And then, of course, you look at football, a program that has only had like 10 or 11 10-win seasons. Like 4 or 5 of those have come just like now. And so, again, that's another check mark in terms of programs being at relatively high points historically. This is an Ole Miss football team that sort of became the darling of college football towards, during the playoff, given everything that happened in November, and really throughout the season, with the drama. I think if you were an unbiased spectator, it was hard not to kind of pull for Ole Miss and Chambliss and his story and just everything that Ole Miss had gone through. And, they were 14 seconds away from playing for a national championship. So they have a lot of those pieces back, most importantly, the quarterback. I think brand-wise, in most sports, I think Ole Miss has to feel pretty good about where it is. Obviously you'd love to win a national title and everything every year, but it's not the way it works. But if you're looking at where Ole Miss is right now compared to where it has been historically, it's hard not to say that this isn't as good of a time as it's been all around.
He's Michael Katz. Follow him online at Michael L. Katz on X. And, of course, djournal.com. The print or the online edition does a great job covering Ole Miss. And he's, of course, Jake Thompson, does a great job covering Ole Miss for the Ole Miss Spirit. That's omspirit.com, an affiliate of On3. You can click that QR code right up there and join the Ole Miss Spirit today. Or should I say, Jake, tell us any deals going on right now with the Ole Miss Spirit.
Yeah, we still got for a few more days 50% off for new subscribers for a year, and that includes obviously access to the Athletic and everything Ole Miss offers, message board, community as well. So yeah, for 50% off new subscribers, if you're brand new, get half off for the year. I think that's running through the end of the basketball portal. So sometimes Tuesday or Wednesday that'll go away. So that's still good for this week.
For Jake Thompson and Michael Katz, I'm Brad Logan. Stay locked in right here to the Talk of Champions. All things Ole Miss right here on the Talk of Champions. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.